Welcome to the Badaboom podcast. I'm Chris. On today's episode, we have on writer Jeremy Adams. We chat about their latest project, Batman and Superman, Battle of the Super Sons, their exciting run on The Flash, and how the Flash family is destined for so much more. Listen in. Hey, Jeremy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad to be here.
Good. I'm so happy to have you on, especially being that, you're a part of a movie where my son was able to watch, which is great because that means I don't have to watch Luca for the millionth time.
Right.
Which is funny because, the movie we're going to be talking about, among other things, is Batman and Superman, Battle of the Super Sons, which I had a fantastic time watching, and I'm sure you had a fantastic time writing. So what was that experience like, and how did you get on board with it?
Oh my gosh. It was, I don't know how many years ago it was now, but it was quite a few years ago. I had just started working with Rick Morales, who's a producer, and producers generally, especially like consulting producers in animation, is more like what you would think of as a director on a feature film. Like Matt Peters directed this and he directs the storyboard guys, but Rick is really the guy who's putting the music together, like putting it together in a lot of ways. And so Rick came to me after we'd worked on Lego Aquaman, and he had given me the Tomasi Jimenez trade. And he's like, I want to do this. And I was like, well, let me read it, because I love Tomasi. When he was doing Green Lantern Corps, that was like, oh my gosh, this guy's so good. He's so great. And I don't know why Super Sons had just kind of like not entered my orbit, but here I was with the trade, and I was like, great, let me start reading it, and immediately fell in love with it because there's so many things that resonated with the way I grew up, and there's movies and shows that I watched. And so Rick and I really tried to get Warner Brothers Animation to say yes. And they said, no, we can't. Somebody in the higher ups, probably at WAG, which is the theatrical division, wants to do it as a movie. And so our dreams were dashed, but we kept talking about it. We kept talking about what we'd make it about for years. We'd have lunch. I go, oh, it would be funny if Damien showed up at his school. Oh, that'd be good. And we would just talk about it. And then, through the many different hands that Warner Brothers has gone through in the past several years, Rick was in a meeting and they were talking about another movie that I wasn't involved in. And Rick just stopped and he goes, guys, this movie's fine, but there's a movie Jeremy and I've been talking about for years that we'd like to do. And we keep getting told no, but can you go check again? Because we'd much rather do this one.
Yeah.
And so they did check, and suddenly there was like this weird window where they're like, yeah, go ahead. And we were so stunned. And I wrote the outline so quickly. I pitched it, and it was such a great pitch because we had already thought about the story for years. So it was like I could go in and just hit it from beginning to end. Everybody knew that everything was figured out. And I wrote it fairly quickly because we were also just paranoid they were going to stop us at any moment. And we moved along, and then here we are. And it's one of the rare projects, not rare, but it went swimmingly. Everybody seemed to be on board. Everybody kind of got it. The only thing that was really different is originally I wanted to do a very rated G Iron Giant type thing. And they said, no, we need to do PG-13 because that's the only people that buy these things. And I was like, yeah, but it's called Super Sons and it's for kids. And I have 2 kids. And so Jim Krieg, who's one of the producers, like, listen, let's just make it like a 1980s PG movie, which is just slightly naughty at times.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation with my oldest daughter last night. She's like, why are there bad words? I go, well, listen,
there was a time.
There's only like 2, and and mostly it's Lois Lane, but and the Starro coming out of the mouth really kind of elevated the kind of a little bit of the horror aspect, but still palatable for kids, because my kids seemed perfectly fine with it. And it was great. And it just came out stunningly well. And I feel very fortunate because they premiered it at New York Comic Con. And it's been years since I've been able to see one of my movies that I've written in front of a crowd because of COVID or whatnot. And it was such a thrilling experience to hear people laugh and gasp and fall in love with Damien and all that stuff.
No, it's great. And even for my son, who's 3.5, he loved it. part of that is Jack Grazer, because he's in Luca. You know, he plays Alberto.
Yeah.
So there was something about it where I was like, I wonder if he recognizes his voice. And you know,
Santa mozzarella.
yeah.
Like,
What's great is like it definitely has that, and especially when it comes to the direct to video and digital stuff, like Warner has always had like a great history of like doing these stories that might not like fit somewhere, you know, whether it be
right,
like Under the Red Hood, where you're like, maybe
right,
like if they ever did a live action version of this, we're probably like 15 years away, because then they have to do like this story and that story.
right.
But because of the animation department, you're able to kind of explore things like Battle of the Super Sons, which was really great,
Yeah,
because it had that feel of Tomasi, but it was new. You know, it was a new
right.
story. And funny enough, I was thinking about this as I was talking with a friend. I was like, I feel like Damien is probably the star, like the biggest box office star of like Warner Brothers Animation, because
He's in
literally
everything.
he's in everything.
Yeah,
Teen
yeah.
Titans. I'm like, at this point, they should have named them, like put Batman's name in these things. It should just be like Damien versus
Damien, I know.
yeah, Damien versus Superman and stuff like that. But he's just such a great addition. What was it like writing those characters? I know, like, obviously you had it like on your mind for a while, but you know, I think people responded well to it, because these two characters people love. You know, it's something
Yeah,
they don't get to see anymore in the comics, because both of them are at different points in their lives
yeah,
in the comics.
yeah.
So I think it's something the movie definitely captures that magic of that pairing.
Yeah, I mean, it was thrilling for us because we had started it, I think, before they had aged him up in the comic books. So there was, and then when they did that, we were like, what are they doing? You know, it was kind of like, what are you talking about? This is such a great characters and chemistry, and I find Damien to be really interesting. And there's different variations on Damien, but when Damien was first introduced, you know, he's a trained assassin and really slightly not evil. Well, evil is a good way.
Yeah.
Like Talia drops him off and is like, "All right, here's your dad. See you later." And he's beaten up Tim Drake and you know just doing horrible things. And his arc from being this guy who's killed people as a kid
Mhm.
to somebody who's restrained enough. And also, what I really like is he reminds me of some friends I had growing
Mhm.
up, friends that were like stoners or something
Yeah.
that were like bad influences. But we ended up liking like fantasy books or something. And that friend that everybody thought was bad ended up being the guy who had my back like forever. To this day, I could probably call him up and he would drop everything and drive multiple states to come help me. And so knowing that, oh, that's what Damien is. That's what Damien is to John. John has an open heart because of the way he was raised and willing to take chances on people and stuff. And he sees in Damien this incredible, heroism, not just because, oh, he's Batman's son. It's because of what he has to overcome from the way he was raised. And I think John understands how crazy that is. He doesn't have any reason to be a good guy, yet he is. It was great. It was great digging in those characters and that kind of like oil and water, battling back and forth, like sniping, but also friendly. And by the end of this, you realize, oh, these guys, they're a bit of an odd couple, but they really care for each other and they have each other's backs. And the thing I keep telling people, it's like Rick and I really want to do a sequel, and the margin between what is successful and allows us to do a sequel is just they're not that big of numbers. And so, I'm encouraging people to buy it instead of pirate it,
Yeah.
because that will directly and has directly influenced what we can and can't do. Like there's criticism always that's like, oh, it's just Batman and Superman. I mean, obviously Batman and Superman are in the title. Originally, we just wanted to call it Super Sons, but they're like, yeah, but we can't sell anything without Batman and Superman in the title. And every time they try, unfortunately, fans don't show up as much, like Wonder Woman or Green Lantern or whatever. And but it's not big numbers in order to make it successful, So I see people really liking Super Sons, and it's so gratifying as an artist and a writer. I just hope people purchase it, because I really want to do more. We have an idea of what we want to do for the second one, and I love Damien and Jonathan, and I love Jonathan's innocence, and I love Damien's bravado, and his one of my favorite parts is at the end of the movie when Wonder Girl's talking to him and he just isn't answering her right away. It's like, did we get cut off, or and he's just enjoying the fact that he saved the world. And they're coming around like, hey, you want to join now? And he's like, well, I'll think about it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's interesting because, funny enough, like I think especially with the straight to DVD stuff, it very much has like that old school Hollywood thing where it's like, hey,
Yeah.
we have to sell it. Like we have certain markets we have to hit. Like these are our
Yes.
margins. If we make it at
Yeah.
this budget, like we could clear this and that. And I think you've probably seen that with the Mortal Kombat stuff. Like you're already on
Yeah.
your third movie, which is
Yeah.
insane. And I think I love those movies too because as a fan
Yeah.
of the video games, I think they capture the essence of how ridiculous some of it is and how
Yeah.
fun and
Yeah.
violent it is that, I think the live action stuff can't really get into because it's like we're serious and we have to spend a lot of
Right.
money into this. But yeah, it is great to see them kind of put that focus on it because I think those are characters that people love and hopefully you guys get to do a sequel. And I think those are characters that are ripe for stories. People don't really get them in
Yeah.
the comics anymore now because
Yeah.
of obvious reasons. So it's definitely something. And even if it's not that, like I think you've seen it. Like my son loves Spidey and his Amazing Friends. And
Yeah.
it's like, hey, like people like kids need this. This is how
Yes.
they get introduced to these things, whether it be some people I think get upset when they're like, well, they turn Teen Titans into Teen Titans Go. And it's like, well, Teen Titans Go has been on for like 10 years at this point.
Yeah.
It's been
I mean,
going
listen,
longer than the original show. So it's like,
I'm always one of the. I'm a fan. So like
yeah.
when that happens, I'm always like, ah. And then you watch and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it always goes. I remember Batman Brave and the Bold. It was like they showed the trailer, and everybody's like, oh,
Yeah.
and then suddenly the show comes out, and we're like, wow, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and it is. You just have to keep your heart open. I mean, the thing is, even with writing the Flash comic book, the way I write the Flash comic is it's kid friendly. The idea is that my daughters could read this book and you don't have to be worried about extreme violence or whatever. And that's comforting because I want it to, because there's not many books out there that are like that. There are not many books. And that's what I loved about Super Sons. Super Sons was just kind of like almost an all ages book. It was an adventure book and fun and exciting. And it could be scary at times, but that's okay. Now listen, I mean, now in the DC universe, if there are infinite Earths, I imagine there's a John and Damian that are still aged down because I've got kids in my book that I'm like, well, maybe they need to interact. Maybe they need to show up somewhere,
Yeah.
But because I love it. I love having something that I can share with my daughters. And Rick was very intense about, he wanted to make something for his son. And so we both had that mindset of, I mean, listen, we grew up in it where there were tons of adventure movies. It was like Explorers and Goonies and Monster Squad and all these things where kids were getting into trouble. And it wasn't necessarily like super sanitized like some movies now. There were always like, oh, a bad word or a kid smoking a cigarette. And you're like, oh, I tried to watch Monster Squad. I was going to show my daughters and I didn't. And thank goodness I didn't. And I was like, oh, I love this movie. It's also super problematic.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah.
That kid, there's a main kid, he's smoking cigarettes. And I'm like, oh, he has probably caused so many kids to smoke. This kid is the coolest kid in the world.
But that's interesting about kids, what they gravitate to as much as you want to kind of like control what they're watching and stuff. And my son, he loves the Batman and Zack Snyder's Justice League, which are like the worst. And there's something, and the funny thing about why he likes Zack Snyder's Justice League, I think, is Steppenwolf's design when he sees him in the screen, and I'm like, that is like a demonic like design. But when he arrives on Themyscira, he's like, yes. And
that's so funny.
And he's nonverbal, but like one night we were watching it, and it gets the part towards the end where it has that like nightmare future. And then the Joker's laughing, and I hear him mimicking the laugh. And I was like, I think we have a problem.
Yeah, seriously.
So
that's true, though. It's funny what kids like glom onto. Like my daughter was like, Starro's so cute. And I'm like, really?
But that was great. What was the inspiration behind Starro? Because obviously he's having a moment, but like, was that something you guys have like in mind, or it just happened to like when you did it, like it's like, oh wait, like the Suicide Squad is out? And
I mean, the Suicide Squad came out after we had done it, so it was really disappointing for us because we were looking at villains that hadn't been used very much, and Starro just lent itself to kind of the body snatcher kind of vibe we were going for. And then, trying to tie it back to Jor-El's lab and all this stuff. I was like, oh, this works great. And then they were in the middle of I don't know if they were done with storyboards or the stuff had gone out to animation, and then they showed a preview for Suicide Squad, and we were like, you know. But then we were also like, well, this will come out a year later. Maybe people will forget. And it was so funny because people don't really understand the timeline of
Yeah.
animation or live action. And when they came out, it's like, oh, why are they doing that? It was just a Suicide Squad. I was like, we had no idea. Like, no one consulted us.
Yeah.
We did this before Suicide. What do you mean? You know?
Also, it was also made by the now head of DC, so it's not
Yeah,
like they
I know.
consulted you
I
guys.
know. Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I would love to meet James Gunn. I'd
Yeah.
be like, some people started tagging James Gunn like, "Hey, we want Super Sons too." I'm like, keep doing that because I
Yeah.
think he's my boss somehow.
Yeah.
Like,
In
I
a
don't know.
weird roundabout way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, the starro of it was just it was mostly uh trying to find something that wasn't being done and wasn't picked to death. You know, Dark Side has been done so many times, and finding new villains that you can really sink your teeth into and just coming at it a different way. I think the one of the things that really unlocked it was it was either Jim or Rick that talked about the Starro coming out of people's mouths, and I was like, that is just so great and it's so creepy, and it became such a fun piece of it because then it was like, oh, you don't know who's infected, and it led to the scene with Lex Luthor, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and just the idea that one of the things that at writing it, I ended up falling in love with Lois Lane in a way that I hadn't because I was just like, oh no, this is like tough as nails reporter that is now a mom, and that doesn't you're not completely changed. Like there's that moment where she has a cigarette lighter. She's like, well, it's just to remind me. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
she used to smoke cigarettes. She used to cuss a blue streak. And it's like, and she's dated and then married the greatest superhero Boy Scout. And then and then, she has a kid. But when push comes to shove, some of that old Lois is gonna come out.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, this is so good. She's gonna burn, the president in the face, and she's gonna cuss, and then she's gonna look at the camera. I love all that because that to me was like that's the heart of who she is. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and the Starro piece of it just like I said, we had no idea that anybody was doing anything. So
But
it's
what's
funny.
awesome, I think it's a different interpretation, and it definitely
Yeah,
like I will say the Suicide Squad definitely raised Starro's profile. For example, my girlfriend who only experiences these things through the movies
yeah.
was like super excited to see Starro because
Oh,
I think what James did that was great in the movie was make Starro very sympathetic, especially in
yeah,
that last part where he's like,
yeah.
I would have been happy, floating in the stars, not being bothered. And we always like when we watch that part, it's like, man, that's really sad. This movie's that
Yeah,
up. But
yeah,
hopefully that brings more people to it. They see Starro on the cover, they see Damien,
yeah.
who obviously is the biggest superstar of the Bat family
Right.
when it comes to animated movies. But one
Yeah,
thing you brought up, which I actually wanted to talk about too, is Run on the Flash, which I think has been amazing because it's one of those books that's very easy to be like, someone's like, hey, I want to read a comic book. It's like, oh well,
right,
here's a single issue that you can read. It's
right.
the Flash. You don't need to know anything about what's going on. Even with the tie-in books, they're really fun, like the Dark
Yeah.
Crisis or the War for
Thank
Earth
you.
3. What's that experience been like, especially being like, this has been like, from my understanding, one of your first experiences in comics, but
Yeah.
it seems like this is a run that's going to be going for a while and it's a run that's going to be remembered. So what that experience has been like.
I I hope so.
Mhm.
I mean, I grew up. My father drew comics. Now, I'm very estranged from my father, and my parents got divorced when I was around 5 or so. But I do remember that he drew comics, and so comics have always been a part of my life. And he did a few DC things, and then in the '80s, he did some Captain Atom books. So I always loved comics. I always grew up with comics. That was a kind of a safe point that he and I could talk about. So it was my room was covered in comics, and it's really funny to me now to look back and think about how happy 8-year-old Jeremy would be, because I'm doing the thing that I was so passionate about, and I'd come at comics backwards through TV and movies and animation. I'd always been constantly trying to figure out how to get into comic books. Martz, who was the former head of Aftershock, but he was also editor in chief at Marvel for the X books, and editor for the Bat books. He had given me my first opportunity pitching a comic like 10 years ago, and it was a Batwing comic. and I didn't get it, but I always kept trying to pursue and figure out ways to get back into comicdom. And so my first book was it was both the Flash, Future State Black Adam, and the Future State Black Racer, like backup issues. And those, it was an incredible experience. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to do a comic. Like that was my dream. That was on my bucket list. And then they came to me and said, hey, do you want to write the Flash? And I was like, well, yeah. And I wasn't the first person they came to. Like they came to my friend Tim Sheridan first, I think,
Yeah.
and he was like, "No," and I was like, "Yeah, I will, sure, absolutely, give
Let
it
me
to me."
follow Williamson's run.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I, I, I didn't even think about it like that. I was just so excited to write a comic, and the big elephant in the room was like, how do we bring Wally West in a way that kind of redeems him in a way? And so that was my initial pitch of the kind of quantum leaping that Wally did was going to lead to that kind of this retcon of heroes in crisis in a way. And it was also more of a way for me to get acclimated. Flash wasn't something I was super into as a kid. And so I obviously, if you're a fan of comics or animes, you know about the Flash, but it was a way for me to get acclimated with all the characters that I would be using further on in the Flash run. And I got really excited about writing it, and I started writing so far ahead, and I don't know if my editors like what I'm doing or, or not. I'm just having fun. And like you said, I will do like an arc, and then I'll do like a couple one-off issues so people can kind of just pick it up. And then it's like an on-ramp, like the intergalactic super wrestlers. To a degree, it's just me going, can I do this? And they're going, sure. And I'm like, okay. And about after the first arc, I had written up all the way to issue 800, like in terms of here are the log lines for the next 3 years, here are the cover comps, here's what it's about. And I think they were just like, you're insane. And I don't know if they never tell me the sales, so I don't know if anything reflects anything. So I'm just going through the stories I have in my head, and I'm having a ball doing it. And then what happens is I'll be writing, and suddenly they'll go, hey, Jeremy, would you like to tie in? Like Josh Williamson, who's been an incredible supporter of mine and just like cheerleader counselor for this crazy world of comic books, he'll ping me and he'll be like, hey, do you want to tie in a Dark Crisis? I'm like, yes. And I think I'm the only ongoing book that did. And I was like, yeah, what do I need to do? He goes, well, you just need to go find Barry Allen on a planet and shake him out of his stupor. I'm like, oh, okay. He goes, well, it should take about 3 books. I'm like, is that it? Like, and I'm like, okay, all right. And so I wrote these other adventures going on that will lead into other things going on in the Flash book. But when I read comics as a kid, I wanted to make sure crossovers were like, if you read a crossover back in the day, it was always irritating to read a crossover and then be like, ugh, I got to get 3 other books to figure out what happened in this little crossover. The Flash crossover was really contained to the Flash book, but had further implications into the Dark Crisis of it all. And so I would like stop sort of what's going on with the Warden Wolf penitentiary stuff, and then do the Dark Crisis stuff, and then pick back up. Like I think the intergalactic wrestler thing I wrote before I knew I was going to do the Dark Crisis tie-in, and so I was like, oh, okay. So now this comes after, so it kind of gets jumbled up a little bit. And with the book going twice a month, with the 1 Minute War starting, I'm already starting to think about after 1 Minute War, like, okay, what happens then? What's the next thing that happens? And I know what it is, but I'm also completely paranoid that they're going to just stop me any moment. Any moment they're going to be like, nope, no more. Nope, you're done. And that makes me sad.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to write as fast and furiously as I can, and people have been really incredibly supportive and nice, and that's not always the case,
Yeah.
So I feel fortunate.
Yeah, it's great. And I think in the time, like what's great about the book is like, like you said, with those tie-ins, for example, like the last Dark Crisis tie-in where you have Linda, put on her costume and stuff like that. like it's so very contained in a way because you use sort of the exposition very like in almost a funny way, like when they're talking about like Beast Boy's like, yeah, he just got shot in the head and Dick's with him and stuff like that. And it's like it's a very serious thing, but it's kind of like put to that. It's like, hey, let Dark Crisis, the main book, address with the severity of that situation,
Right.
while we
Right.
have fun here, and we don't take away from the fact that because some people, comics these days are very expensive, so to
Yeah.
buy every
Yeah.
tie-in for something, especially for a kid, would be
Yeah.
$50 a month, which to
Oh,
them is a whole video game. That's
I know.
that's almost like close to half a year of Netflix, all these things.
I know.
So to be able to deliver that, it's a joy, especially seeing that you're someone newer to comics, to appreciate the moment and really dive in. Like you
Yeah.
definitely see it in the work. And with the 1 minute war, like what's that like being able to create your own event? Is anything tying in outside of the
No.
Flash into it, or is it just self-contained to these
No,
books?
it's just, I mean, because it's so speedster focused, and the premise around, these guys moving so fast that everything's slowed down around them. It's hard. It's hard because it's scary. This is the kind of first time I've really done anything like this, and I'm incorporating all the Flash family, and scared to death it'll be. I'm scared to death that people will. Well, I know they will. I know they'll read it and they'll get upset about things, and I'm like, but just wait to the end. Just read it as a whole.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Don't get too upset.
Mhm.
And I'm just having a lot of fun writing it. There's some great interactions I didn't expect. Like I didn't expect to like the way that Kid Flash and Impulse, like their relationship in a way, and I didn't expect Jesse Quick and Ire's, like certain little things that pop up in the book that I'm like, oh, I like this. I really like this, because in my mind, the Flash family, could be as dynamic and rich and multifaceted as like the Bat family is, just given the chance. And I think what happens in the 1 minute war is showing that they're all individuals and they all have strengths and weaknesses. And then hopefully out of that, we could see the Flash family take on more responsibility. And I hint at it with like, there's the issue where Wally, I don't want to say breaks out Kid Flash from Teen Titans Academy, but goes on patrol with him, and what Wally's saying is basically like, our job isn't just we can patrol the city in a second. Our job is to patrol the world. Like we're the boots on the ground. We're running toward danger. And I think when something like the 1 minute war happens and these aliens called the Fraction, I think there's going to be a real awakening to, well, we have the ability to travel anywhere, space and time, maybe our responsibility isn't just here. I don't know. We'll see, but I'm having so much fun kind of exploring those options and trying. The thing for me is like trying to get excited about writing that issue or whatever the issue is. Like, oh, what do I want to see? What do I really want to do? The hard part for me is not being able to catch up on all the other books, because again, they're expensive. I'm paying for DC Infinite Ultra, it's
Same.
it's like, hey, this is great, because it's like now it's only like a month back. And I'm like, oh, I can finally catch up on my peers' work. So it's great. It's great. And I think as DC and Warner Brothers settle down, I think you're going to see a stronger thread of continuity through the books, which is something that I think was lacking in some ways. And it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's great because you feel like everything's interconnected in one universe, and then in some ways, you're annoyed because that means that other books are going to touch on your book.
Yeah.
Like people are going to use Wally and other things, and I'm not going to have a say in it. I'm just going to ignore it. No.
No, you just have to pretend it's the Omniverse. They're all happening at the same time.
Exactly.
It's a different But you talked about kind of like being worried about like what people think, like especially with this big event coming on. Like, did Flashpoint Beyond prepare you to kind of be able to jump into things as that big? Because I feel like that story like definitely ties into things that I think are very big and sometimes are very precious, like the Watchmen and stuff. And obviously, you're working with someone like Jeff Johns, who's shifted the whole DC universe like 5 or 6 times,
I know,
and
right?
that had done things, and has swung big, and have gotten praise for it, but also swung, and some people are like, I don't know.
Right.
So, like, what was it like working on that project, and how has that affected the way you see sort of writing the Flash?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think Jeff and even Tim, they come at story way differently than I do. They definitely come at it from the emotional aspect first, and I come at it from the kind of big idea aspect first, which I think made a really great partnership. But I didn't. I've read tons of Jeff Johns stuff, so getting to meet him was weird because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm meeting somebody I've read all their, like
Yeah.
it's just a weird thing. And then he ended up being the nicest human being on earth, and that was surprising too because I had heard things, and I was like, oh,
Mm.
this is not what I'd heard. Like he's the nicest human being on earth and unbelievably collaborative. But he also has a vision, and the way that we approached it and got in a room and started breaking things and coming with our story ideas and I know a lot about DC universe, and I would try to maybe try to figure out if I could beat him at some of the but he's so good at it. And so we would have fun. All three of us had so much fun putting it together and watching it come out. And honestly, I'll be really honest. I feel like I was naive about how impactful it was going to be.
Yeah.
I think I was just like, yeah, we're just going to tell a story in this universe. That'd be great. And as it kept going, it was like, oh, this might be changing everything, you know? And the way Jeff approaches things, I think he kept saying, like, we can't just do this to have this self-contained thing. Like, it has to mean something more. And he kept hitting us over the head with it, not in a bad way. I'm talking
Yeah.
like in a great way. And so there was a moment in issue 2 where I remember getting the art back from Zermanico, and I just stopped and I went, oh, this might be a bigger deal than I thought it was going to be, like way bigger deal. And and I think it started with like not many people talking about it or whatever, and then it kind of grew and grew, and then Jeff at one point showed us his pitch for the Golden Age, and I was just like, this is unbelievable. And rolling into JSA and Stargirl and stuff, the stuff he wants to do is, again, he's pulling on Jeff Johns, and he's doing incredible things and these huge swings and these things that make you want to go, oh my goodness. Like, especially if you're a hardcore like DC guy or comic guy, you're like, oh my gosh, what? And he's talked about it. You've seen the stuff about the sidekick characters that were pulled out of time and now are like being put back in. Like, some of that stuff is really, really, really cool. And it's weird because I was doing something tangential to what he's doing in the Flash, and it's just been really, really neat to see him operate and see how he operates. Because, as I said, I'm fairly new to the craft of comic writing, and he has a lot of like tips and tricks, that I've tried to glean and figure out how he does things. And not because I want to copy, but it's more like what my mom used to say: chew the hay and spit out the sticks. Like you just take what you like and throw away the rest. But it's been an incredible experience, and seeing the artwork come back was kind of overwhelming. And as we approached number 6, it was just kind of like, oh, this has become such a big deal. And we were supposed to be, originally we were going to have it out before Dark Crisis happened. It just kind of coincided with that. It didn't mean to be like, oh, competing crises or anything like that. It was just the way that everything worked out, because the art's so unbelievable. And yeah, as far as like, did it prepare me for, I don't know. I think Flashpoint Beyond was something for everybody. People that are reading The Flash, I think, I hope will dig 1 Minute War, but I hope it'll draw some other eyeballs. Other people will pick up the book. Roger Cruz has been doing the art, and he's done such a phenomenal job so far. And like I said, I worry, but I only say that in an ego sense.
Yeah.
When I write on Supernatural or Scooby Doo or anything, it's like, you can't make everybody love you. Don't even try. I mostly do it because I want to do whatever I'm doing. I want to do, and I want to see. I'm not necessarily concerned. It's just, it feels very good when people like it, because art is performative in a lot of ways, and you want people to like it. You're drawing a painting not just for yourself. You want people to be like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's my hope. If they don't like it, I'll be like, oh well, I guess hopefully I can try again. Hopefully it won't be so bad that I can't try again. But so far, I think I've engendered some love that I can use to my advantage for this. And hopefully, if that goes well, I would love to do my own. I have a ton of independent comic ideas I'd love to do. I'm not entirely. I'm scared to like start a Kickstarter and be like, hey, I want to
Yeah.
do a comic, and like $1, it's like something like that. Because there's a lot of books I would love to do, and mainly out of self-preservation and just the
Yeah.
idea of being able to own your own IP and own your own characters and stuff you've created. Like there was a moment when I came up with Wham for those intergalactic wrestlers for DC, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love this idea. And I turned it in. I thought, oh man, should I have kept that for myself? Like,
Yeah.
I was like, maybe I should have, but right now I'll just have fun, putting ideas out there for
And
my
then you're
corporate
reading Dual
overlord.
Power Bomb and you're like, damn it.
I had never read it. It was so funny. I had never read it. And because I had wanted to do the wrestling thing for so long, and then it started coming out. I haven't read it yet. And I kind of want to, because I know it's probably really good. But my intergalactic super wrestlers will show up again in the DC comics because Wally's got to defend his title. So
That's awesome. Yeah, you should definitely read. It's a great book. And definitely wrestling's having a moment, because I think
isn't it?
AEW's come back, and I think it's definitely got some people back into wrestling that maybe were like dormant wrestling fans.
Yeah.
And then you definitely got a lot of comic creators coming in that grew up on that Attitude Era.
Yeah.
All that stuff, and it's definitely showing. And I think it's wrestling is very performative, and it's sports entertainment. So it definitely lends itself to comics, and that's great to hear. Kind of like you were able to learn, especially I think people kind of look down at that when you're like, oh yeah, I learned a lot from this person. It's like, are you biting them? Are you copying them? It's like, I'm a human being. They've been in comics for 20, 30 years. I've been in it this way. So it's like he might know something that might unlock something for me.
Right.
And I definitely look forward to kind of what you're gonna bring, because what you've been doing with the Flash. I'm excited, whether it be another DC character or your own IP, because it's been great, whether it be the Mortal Kombat stuff, which we haven't really touched on, Super Sun, the Flash. Like it's great to see someone having fun with what they're doing. It isn't like, oh, like you really done like jumped into it, versus I think some people use comics as a way to be like, all right, like I'm gonna get my movie deal, and then I'll never have to see these people again. So it's always great to see someone that has like a genuine passion. It's like, hey, like if they let me write this for 5-10 years, I'll do it.
I mean, that's how I feel. I'm like, please don't. Like, at least give me, you hear about, those TV shows. I mean, it was the bane of my existence growing up when you'd watch especially genre television, which I loved, Farscape or what was Dark Angel, whatever. And it was like, they just got canceled. They would cliffhanger it and they got canceled. And I was like, oh, I hope that never happens. You know what I mean? Like, like if they ever did that, just give me like 6 issues to wrap it up or something, or but don't, like just let me keep going.
Yeah. Every time that comes up, I think of did you watch Swamp Thing, the one that was on DC Infinite?
Didn't. No.
It was so good. And they canceled it right when they premiered the first episode. So like every episode you're watching it, you're like,
I know.
They didn't even give you a chance to be like, get to the end and then be like, all right, it was too expensive. It's like you're watching it with this dread. You're like, oh my God, the makeup, all that. So I definitely know how you feel.
It's brutal. And it's funny because again, that's just like the DVDs. It's like when you look at comic books, the barrier, it's like 1,000 books can change a book from, oh yeah, this is successful, to, oh, we got to cancel this book. It's like 1,000 books. That's it. Like, guys, like, no, that's all it is. And I jokingly, when I first started on the Flash, I would tell people, I go, listen, as long as I'm writing it, Wally's going to be fine. But if I'm not writing it, you never know what's going to, it was like a threat. It was like, man, I don't know what the next guy's going to do, but
he was killing people before me. So
exactly.
It's like, if you don't want that, like basically hang that over people's head. That's a good way to get business. It's like, hey.
Well, I'm trying, obviously, I don't know if anybody promotes it as much as like my book. I don't know if you saw the wrestling promotion I did where Jim Krieger was the producer on Super Sons. He and I dressed up as a wrestler and I had a custom belt made. that says like, intergalactic multiversal champion, and we were sitting there and I'm like, oh, listen, bro, like, Wham is coming. Like we did our promo because it's like, I'm having fun. And I want people to come to the Flash book and be like, this is like a fun club. This is just like a fun club of people that are having fun, reading a book that's fun and a lot of zany ideas. And I have a ton more zany ideas that one of them, they just said, yeah, you could do this. And I was like, are you sure? So I'm not going to ask too many times, are you sure? I just want to go with it as fast as possible.
Listen, put as many of those ideas before there's a Flash movie that's super successful and then
Right.
people care.
Right.
Then they're like, all right, like we got to change the suit. We got to go back to Barry. We got to make sure that, he's more characterized like he is in the movie.
Yeah.
So I think, you got a good year
that's what I'm
putting
hoping.
in those crazy ideas in before they're like, hey,
exactly.
What's going on over here? Shouldn't these be more like the movie?
Yeah. Before the Eye of Sauron turns on me. Yeah.
No, but again, that's super awesome. And for, obviously you're really super focused on the Flash, but is there any particular like books that you're working on, whether it be your independent stuff or, DC stuff that you would really love to jump into or, hope to get published soon?
I mean, I like I said, I have a lot of indie stuff that I would love to do. The stuff that I had created as screenplays, that were just too weird. And now I find myself in a position where, oh, I think I could do these as books, which would be really fun. And I'm very heavily invested in genre in general, whether it's, horror or fantasy. But no, right now it's just like I haven't really had the opportunity. I mean, I'm really grateful DC's putting the Flash twice a month, but yeah, I would love. There's a couple books that I would love to do. There were a couple characters that I am somewhat desperate to touch, and I've made it known. I have a dream idea that I really, 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 really want to do, and so far everybody's been like, no. No one will buy that. No one wants that. And I'm like, so in the meantime, I'm having fun trying to incorporate as many DC characters, whether it's Animal Man and his daughter Maxine and stuff like that. Like there are stories within that I would love to touch on. And there are a lot of characters. Like I said, I love Ted Kord. I love Dr. Fate. I love a lot of I really do like the obscure characters in a way. I like the characters that people aren't really playing with as much. I've loved it when I've been able to use Roy Harper in the book. And I have an affection toward a lot of characters that maybe aren't the top tier, but I feel like they could be, or it could be a really cool book if given the chance. But that's, again, it's all up to, if Josh Williamson and Tom Taylor could just stop writing 12 books a month,
maybe there'll be some space for you.
Yeah. No, I'm teasing. I mean, but I would love to be able to do a lot more. I have a big capacity between the comic books and the movies and stuff. There's still tons I want to do. I wrote a novel at the beginning of the pandemic because I was like, I've always wanted to write a novel, and I wrote this like fantasy novel, and I was like, and then I sent it to my sister-in-law to kind of edit. And it came back like it was shot on the street corner during a mafia fight. And I was like, oh man. So it's been intimidating trying to go through and kind of answer some of those editorial things. And I was like, well, maybe I'll just self-publish that, or I don't know, but that's hard for me too. It's hard to do something and then put it out there and hope that people like, that's always hard. Some people, it's really easy. It's not that it's such a huge function of what I do. And yet it's still like, ugh. Feeling like you're getting picked last in dodgeball, which was, definitely the way I grew up. So,
no, it's tough because you put yourself out there and you want people to like it. You don't, put something on paper like, yes, you like it, but you don't want people to be like, you know what, that is the worst thing I've ever read.
Right.
You don't want the Billy Madison answer. It's like, may God have mercy on your soul.
That's right.
So, it's. There's always a part of it, whether you're even this, like doing the podcast and stuff like that. I'm like, all right, like I hope they don't think I'm an idiot. Oh, well, publish this, and it's like really just a conversation,
Right.
So I think we all have that in
sure.
Whether it's creative stuff. So, but I would love to see a Ted Kord Blue Beetle book by you. I think it would be really fun, especially seeing the DC short, and
Oh,
Obviously Dr. Fate, hopefully now that he's in a movie, they're like, all right, let's get a Dr. Fate book going.
there's
Um,
got to, I mean, they've got to be, right? I mean, especially because Pierce Brosnan is anything, you're just like, well, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Like, that was kind of like the kind of like popped out to me in the Black Adam movie, because you're just like, man, he'd be great. Oh, wait, he is Dr. Fate. Wait, they should do a movie with him, him
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Constantine. I don't know.
Yeah, funny enough, Constantine is like one of those characters too that you're like, wait, he kind of has Dr. Fate's spot where you're like, well, he's kind of the Strange of the DC
Right.
universe, because whatever book he's in, it's the crisis events. Tom Taylor writes a really great Constantine.
Yeah.
Even in the animated movies, he's really great.
Yeah.
The
Ernie
House
does those.
the House of Mystery was great with him,
Yeah.
and
Ernie Altbacher does a lot of those. He
Yeah.
has John's voice like down pat. He has great comic book ideas. I wish somebody give him a shot in the comic book realm, because he has some pitches that would just blow your mind, that I'm just like, oh, we've tried to shoehorn him in, but not yet, I guess.
Yeah, no, when Flash starts, pumping, and you could get backup stories and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
mean, that's how you started. So maybe those
Yeah.
little 10 pages, and then
Totally.
it's really getting your foot in the door. But I'd be excited to read it. He's having a moment too, because obviously Keanu's coming back.
Yeah.
Which
I know.
is gonna be awesome. It's like, oh wait, like I remember being a kid and watching that movie, and I would, when I saw that movie when I was a kid, if the DC logo didn't play at the beginning of the movie, I would not have known it was a comic book.
Totally.
Yeah, so
That's funny.
that would be it's great to see, have that. And I hopefully he gets a chance, because obviously seeing you get a chance, you've delivered a book, I think, that consistently is fun. You know what I mean? You get your $3.99 every time. It's like, oh wow, they're in a the Flash. It's the Flash family proper. It's not like the Bat family where like they're a family.
Yeah.
But they're kind of like estranged. They're like, I live over here. I live over here. It's like, hey, like we all genuinely like each other.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, like those brothers. Like, man, I hate my brother. It's
totally.
like, oh, we love each other. We were excited to go on adventures together.
Totally.
It's like, hey, the Bat family's like, if I could do this myself, I would.
Yeah. Totally.
I don't want to come to you, but I have to.
Yeah.
So
That's
I thank you for giving fans that, because I think with Wally, he definitely needed it. I think when it comes to redeeming characters, like fans are forgiving. People.
Right.
Wally is a character that's been around for a long time. It doesn't take much, but I think you've definitely grabbed something, and I'm excited to see what's to come. The 1 minute war. Honestly, that I'm sure that was an easy selling point when you're like 1 minute war. It's like the Flash family, and it was like, you don't even really have to tell us the details. Yeah, you could go ahead.
No, that's literally what happened. I said, hey, I got this idea. It's called 1 minute war. It's like, oh, that was like what people were like, whoa, that's good. And I was like, don't you want to know what it's about? It's, no, that's great. Just go with it.
And it's like, we can sell a bunch of copies just putting that. Not even anyone on the site. It's just 1 minute war. It's like, all right, I'll buy that. But it's awesome. Thank you for coming on. Being very precious for time, and obviously like sharing. Super Sons. Like I said, it's always great to share something with your kids. I think you guys definitely delivered that. That was something that I'm always having a hard time finding something that my son likes, because he's very like, he'll like, the Batman, and then his other favorite movies, the Luca movie. So you're like, oh, you have such a wide spectrum. You can never know. You can never know. So, but thank you for coming on. And with that,
thank you.
Badaboom.
Oh, Badaboom.